Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 68 of Relating to DevSecOps, where we explore the development, security, and operational issues of today so we can solve real-world problems with people that face them. I'm your host, Ken Toller, and I'm joined again by Mike McCabe, and today we're going to dive straight into a DevSecOps analysis that we're both pretty excited to talk about, a report that came out sort of alongside the Verizon data breach report. Had some interesting results we want to cut through. Mike, how you doing today? We're doing an afternoon episode today, so both low energy, but I'm bringing the pep.
I'm going to try to feed off of your pep, yeah. We just talked about it. I've been up since 6, so.
I'm just going to go full YouTube.
Okay, go full YouTube.
All right. So anything that you want to preamble with this? Because you sort of, you came across this, and then I had a chance to read through it, and just wondering what you're looking to get out of the conversation a little bit.
Do you want to give a quick overview of what we're talking about? Then I'll tell you why I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, totally. So we have this report. It's called the Cost of a Data Breach Report, and it's by IBM. So I have a feeling that we're going to get into things that result in going to IBM services. But all that being said,
this is not a paid episode.
Yeah, we are not sponsored or sponsoring IBM, regardless of either of our histories. But I do find it pretty interesting to read about, and it's good to have some data around this. But yeah, it's cost of a data breach. It's like 70 pages of all this sort of analysis around data breaches and how much it costs and factors into that and how to prevent it and things of that nature. So I had a good time getting through the content.
Yeah, I'm always a little suspect of the Gartner-ish, this type of data, but actually it was pretty interesting. Like, if all those facts and figures are correct, it actually was pretty interesting. I think the main point that stuck out to me was how DevSecOps reduced the cost of a breach by quite a bit. We can get into all the facts and figures, but that's why I sent it to you, to say this is actually sort of interesting. So now we're putting on our Gartner hats, doing some analysis, reading slicks, But yeah, there's a bunch of interesting figures. I pulled out a few. I'll start with the cost of a data breach is up to $4.45 million in the U.S., which, yeah, that's a decent bit. It's the highest level ever. Not surprising. I don't think lawyers have cut their rates ever, so those guys aren't getting paid less.
Yeah, it's breaches and fines are the number one costs, right? Like GDPR fines, and then breaches and ransomware attacks seems to be the biggest thing. Did you read anything about because I was focusing on the DevSecOps thing, what the cost goes to within the breach?
I think it's mostly fees and the investigation. They think they factor in some time it takes to address the breach as well. You obviously lose a lot of time to investigating and figuring out where the source of the breach was and what the kind of scope of it is. So that's kind of a part of it too. Yeah.
That is the big thing, right? Is that investigating, you're paying out the nose because you have to recover, right? Like every day you're bleeding in a breach. And so I think that that cost overall is what that I'm just super interested in it. I also liked the breakdown by industry. No surprises there. Healthcare, finance, pharmaceuticals always at the top. But I expected finance to be much higher. But I guess the health data is probably more costly now because of fines.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting to see the increase. They talk about it here with COVID-19 and pandemic and healthcare and all of that being a prime target between 2022 and 2023.
Yep.
But yeah, interesting takeaways. What else you have before we dive into the DevSecOps part of it?
One frustrating thing, one of the facts from it, 51% of organizations plan to increase security investment after a breach. That's frustrating for two reasons. A, 51 is pretty low. I would think that everyone has security issues, breaches happen, stuff just happens. But A, I would think it's frustrating that some people only focus on it after a breach happens. A lot of people just think it's not going to happen to us, or we just don't have time to deal with it. But 51% is pretty low. 49% of people feel like, yeah, we got breached, but we don't need to invest any more than we already are on our security. That's like, yeah, you would think that after you just shelled out $4 million to lawyers and IR firms and to fines, that you'd think 90% of people would be investing more in cybersecurity, not less.
I mean, you always think, there's two things I think that go into that actually that I've taken away from some recent work. One is, I think that there's a perception that there's a perception that some companies have that their security is actually good or good enough to prevent a breach, and if they have a breach, is what it makes them realize that it wasn't good enough. It's not like they all know that their security is bad or that their practices are bad, and then it's like not having that dedicated team and not investing in it is part of the equation of thinking that the security is better than it is.
Mm-hmm.
So unless you've had, like, I've run into issues where, like, and part of what they define as DevSecOps is this app pen testing thing. I've run into situations where, like, the answer on the board would be, have you done any app specific pen tests or web app pen tests on your products? And they'd say, oh yeah, definitely, we do that annually. And then I've started to look into things there, and then you'll see that, oh, the application was scoped for 3 days and it's maybe 500,000 lines, or it's got, some people do measure by dynamic pages. It's got 100 dynamic pages and they assessed 30 of them, or time boxed the assessment. Mm-hmm. And so they're doing these practices. So on paper, they're like, yeah, we do all these things, and they're trying to balance the budget. And in those conversations, you're having conversations like, or you're having points come up like, well, how much could you do in 3 days? Or how much could we do for 50,000? Or how much, and I think that without that security team there to put, to highlight what you're losing in those, unfortunately, the pen test firms or the security firms are trying to get the deal. Sometimes that's financially driven, and then it just gets lost in translation between, like, yeah, we got the pen test. They said that they did what they could do within that budget. They said it was good enough, and everybody moves on with their lives. And so, and unfortunately, there's just a wide gamut of where you could potentially fall in there, given your risk. And unless you have somebody constantly evaluating that risk, you could, on paper, look like you're doing everything. This is the compliance problem, right? And I think that after the breach, and especially if it's a bad one, you kind of think, maybe we should get a second opinion.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's always pure negligence. I just think that people are trying to run businesses, and unfortunately, sometimes they're given bad advice.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think there is. It's easy for us because we spend all day, every day in this world to, we read about breaches, we see what happens to people, we deal with breaches, things like that. So it's definitely easy to think like, well, why would you ever think that you're secure? Like the biggest companies in the world that have thousands of security people, they're not secure. Like they're in a better spot than maybe companies with no security, no pen testing, no people doing proactive work, but no one is really secure. So it's just funny if a company would assume they're secure without doing much. Different mentality, different background, different thing they focus on every single day. But it almost feels like, to a degree, especially with cyber insurance, and this is a different topic, the people are like, getting breached is the cost of doing business, and we'll externalize the risk there by just having cyber insurance that pays for this $4.5 million breach cleanup, and we don't have to slow down our business to deal with it. That's a whole nother topic beyond.
Yeah,
this,
I think a little bit derailed there. I mean, I do agree. I mean, I'm It's just that I think what you said kind of nails it. It's that we sort of in the industry sell the fact that we are securing a business, but we need to do that in order to sell something. But at the end of the day, it is an unending journey. Mm-hmm. You know, you're always going to be working towards a more secure posture. And I think that most people want like a start and a finish. They want a deliverable. They want a, you know, an end. Are we secure or not? And I don't think that that exists, right? I think you are constantly fighting new battles and preparing for new adversaries, and that's just the name of the game. And I don't think that I don't think that's a well accepted mentality in business. I think that it's a well accepted mentality in the security world. And what we are sort of fighting is how do we make ourselves more resilient, more robust? I think the best definition I ever heard was we're not making systems secure, we're making them more robust, right? We're making them more defensible, resilient. And I really like that. And that was, it's not my quote, but you know, I think that that's what I take away.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing I saw in here, which I just want to call out, is that the cost and frequency, the highest cost and most frequent path or initial attack vector was phishing. Which, of course it is, because we still haven't fixed that problem. And then stolen and compromised credentials, which I thought was interesting that they took that, they split that from malicious insider.
Yeah.
Also up there is cloud misconfiguration, so that's right down your alley.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I also saw 82% of the breaches involved data stored in the cloud. So that's not very surprising. Every company is either using cloud storage or using SaaS, which they might just group it SaaS storage with cloud storage. But yeah, misconfigurations are still a big thing, not going away anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
Getting better, but still there.
There's a bunch of other interesting stuff in here, like who discloses the breach, or like how do they find out about it? And it's like the top ones are like either somebody just found like a benign third party, like a customer, or the attacker.
Yeah.
And like the highest cost is the one where the attacker tells you about the breach. But just something that seems obvious, but you're like, yeah, of course it is, because they're like, hey, I took your stuff and now I want some money.
Yeah, here's a Bitcoin address. Just go ahead and send that over.
Yeah, but 40% came from someone else. That's crazy. Like, you don't even know that you're being breached, or that you have a breach. 30% was by the tools and 27% by the attacker. So it's like the attacker, your tooling, or just a customer or a benign third party.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder how many breaches only get caught from like AWS abuse reports, where they see some server in your environment that's
maybe it is like
hitting,
like when they say benign third party, maybe it's like your supplier or something, your platform.
Yeah, quite a few. We've done some of those where that was the first indicator that something was going wrong. Was AWS was like, what is your server doing, and can you stop it, please?
Yeah.
So
what would you say this server does here?
Attacks everyone else. Yeah.
Office Space joke for folks that are that are old enough.
Over
all right.
30.
So we've like 15 minutes talking about some of the cool metrics in there. Let's talk about the DevSecOps thing. So the reason this was so interesting was that IBM claims in this report that the cost mitigators, the impact of like 27 factors on the mean cost of a data breach, meaning that like some of these factors have like people with these factors or companies with these factors increased the amount that they paid in a data breach, or the cost in the data breach, or drastically decreased the amount that was involved in the cost of a data breach. And at the top of this list of the most impactful cost as the most effective cost mitigator was this DevSecOps approach. And I think that this is like incredibly funny because of what we talk about every year, which is, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what is the DevSecOps approach? And in this paper, they have a definition, but DevSecOps is mentioned like, I'm counting it, 4, 5, 6, 7, 12 times in this like whole document. It's the word DevSecOps shows up 12 times, and it is never truly defined unless you click out into a service page, which, take that for what it is. But in that service page, it does say that the main areas that they were evaluating here were secure by design, secure by default, application penetration testing, and automation. And so I think that that's really interesting because it ties into IBM's definition of DevSecOps, which is people, process, technology. So, the more people that are involved, the more automation that you have, the more efficient your process, the better your DevSecOps maturity is. So I'll leave it at that just to get your thoughts on like how you're seeing this, because I kind of want to go down this path of what is DevSecOps in this and like why we think this number is so much lower given this quote approach that they're evaluating. But any initial thoughts as we dive into this?
Yeah, before reading their definition, I thought it made sense because I thought of it as companies that had better automation and better engineering practices around their environment were able to react faster. So, for instance, if they detected a compromised credential, they could figure out where that credential was, remove it as fast as possible so that the attacker wouldn't have as much access to, other parts of their environment, or wouldn't be able to get the data, or wouldn't be able to encrypt all their server or something like that. Like that was my initial takeaway. But that was before I read their definition, which it kind of sounds like they're putting the kitchen sink into DevSecOps. They're throwing a lot of different things into it, which I agree with the, people, process, and technology. Like that's definitely all part of it, but you could group anything under those three things and call it DevSecOps. I think it's kind of a wide definition, and I think pen testing was part of that too, which I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'd agree that pen testing is really DevSecOps, but my takeaway is when you look at a well-run engineering organization, they're able to react to breaches faster because they know where things are. Maybe they have better identity and access management practices. They have better logging and monitoring practices, so they know when these things happen. They don't have to have AWS reach out and say, hey, we see this activity going on. So they get alerted first. They can remediate it without maybe even alerting security until after they fix the issue, then they bring in security to do a full, forensics analysis. That was kind of my takeaway, that makes sense. A well-run engineering team should be able to react to a breach or a potential breach, just like if it was an outage or something like that.
Yeah, I like that. Basically, the more you know, right, the easier it is going to be to recover. And so the less time, so it's a factor of time. Time is money. You're reducing the overall cost. They do have on page 63 of this document, they talk a little bit about the approach. And they say that they used 27 factors in this analysis for the report to build security into any of the tools and platforms in the organization. And the principles that they talk about, like we were saying, is secure by design, secure by default. So I think I think the view is kind of what you're talking about is that we're building in these defenses from the ground up. I think that's really difficult to quantify though. So I'd be interested to understand how that evaluation happened. Does that mean threat modeling? Does that mean they had security requirements in there? Was it one security requirement? How much of these different 27 factors affected what trajectory? But I think that all of these things is really interesting because it proves that if you take any of these into account, even if it's a broad even if you're thinking broadly about DevSecOps, that it does have a net positive effect on the impact of a breach. And one of the things I think we always struggled with was like, what is the thing that we always pointed to before, right? Is that the cost of a vulnerability is like whatever 10x if it's discovered at the end of the SDLC. And I think this is a much more impactful statement if we have some more data around it, because this says it's not just about when you discover the vulnerability, it's about the design of your the design of your SDLC and how you are incorporating security into the whole thing that makes the difference, as opposed to, you could put threat modeling in the design phase, and we talk about these phases. This is more saying, if you are integrating security into every phase of the SDLC, and that is your mindset, which we talk about, right? DevSecOps is a mindset, that it will have a net positive effect. And it seems like common sense that it would, but it's nice to have a number associated with this, because some of the other things that it compares it to are like having an incident response team. You would think if you have a good incident response team that you're able to, respond quickly and solve the breach, and it doesn't cost you as much. Or it's even above AI and machine learning. It's above employee training. It's above having an IR plan. So if you take these different factors and you put them together, you might be able to chalk it up to there's just more involved, or it's a more general thing for DevSecOps. But I don't know. I kind of like having a number that says, if I put in all this effort, that it does have a net positive effect. So I think that's really interesting. And then to your point of just being able to react quickly, one of the other things they talk about in there is cloud deployments, specifically as like a DevSecOps thing. So the principles that are being applied to cloud environments, which is when we enter a cloud environment, a lot of us transfer security over to the cloud provider. So we will say, okay, if we use this abstracted service, we get a lot of the security for free. And that mentality is sort of what I think they're talking about in this, is that if you aren't transferring that risk, you should have the same rigor in your security program to make sure that the best practices that are available to you are incorporated, and that you work with those best practices rather than try to fight against them. And how many times have you and I been in a conversation where they're like, well, we need to bypass this security control because of X, Y, and Z, or as opposed to what the AWS mentality is, which is like, if you use EKS, you only have a choice of these versions. You can't go back to 1.18. You can't go back to 1.17. You have to update. If you, at a certain point, these AMIs are going to be EOL, you don't have a choice to use another AMI. Like, they are very explicit about that kind of thing and what that record is, and that's what keeps them up to date. And I think that adopting that in your software development lifecycle is what can contribute to this. And I think that the more people that are in cloud are seeing the benefits in security because of that approach. That's kind of where I think the flavor of this is going. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I wonder how much of it is that just being forced into a more secure mode from certain choices that are forced upon you by cloud providers. It's a give and a take, though, because on one hand you get some of that stuff for free, and then on the other hand you have all the misconfigurations you have to now worry about. That in the shared responsibility model, you're responsible for those, even if you're not responsible for what versions of Kubernetes EKS supports, things like that. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting give and take, and it's AWS or any cloud provider, by kind of tightening the reins a little bit, would have a huge impact on all those types of things. Runtimes, patching, AMIs, all that stuff. So it's definitely a give and take. Yeah, it's funny. I did a training this morning where I talked about, the shared responsibility model of like, don't think that you wash your hands of security when you start using cloud. It's just a different set of responsibilities. So, but yeah.
But people want that easy button, right? I've started to think about how we how we take a page from that book and internally start providing security as a service and an enabler to other parts of the business, right? Like if you use it this way, it comes with less headache. If you use our security service, we talk about treating developers as our customers all the time, but if you truly are living that and you're building security services for engineers and for developers within your organization, it makes things easier for them. And I think that if you think about it in the cloud model of like how often you try to push towards some of these secure by default cloud patterns, if you can create those for your engineers at the business layer or at your engineering team layer, you'll be so much further ahead. You just, because of the same reasons that you like these cloud providers as a security professional. Not that we were always there. I mean, we were pretty critical of cloud in the old days,
5 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also find that application testing and penetration testing sort of addition kind of weird, because it's like, how is that? I mean, why is that included in the DevSecOps approach? I don't know.
Might just be a way to sell some pen testing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I do think this is like a way to like put metrics into, to get sales out of it. But I appreciate the work, I mean, it helps. We need this. We need these like some numbers. I mean, one of the hardest things that we have is like trying to figure out how to apply data to the things that we are intuiting. Is that a word?
Mm-hmm. It is, yes.
Yeah. Intuiting.
According to me, at least.
Yeah. Some folks might be yelling at me.
Yeah.
From beyond the screen.
But yeah, I mean, I wonder if you could use this argument to say, use this in your argument to say fund security better, because you're going to get breached eventually. Small breach, big breach, who really knows? It's going to happen eventually in a long enough timeline. So use this as an argument to fund security in advance. I think the one thing that probably is not covered enough in depth is how much of a distraction a breach is. Like anyone who's been through them, it's all hands on deck. Everything else pauses. You're talking to lawyers once a day, if not more. And it's just a huge impact to your business beyond the data breach, beyond customer trust loss, beyond fines, things like that. It's like pausing your entire business just to work on one issue. And that's not the issue that makes you any money. So they cover a little bit of that, but I think it's probably underrated or understated. So I think that's an argument that I like to use a lot. Is I tell developers, it's like, care about security or you're eventually going to be on the phone all day long with lawyers talking about what this issue was, how did it happen, and how you've addressed it.
Yeah.
No offense to lawyers, play a very important role, but it's not always fun to answer those same questions over and over again. If we have any lawyers that listen to us, my apologies.
That's right. Yeah. No, I mean, I do. I think that, one of the things I would mention too is like, don't look at this. This will help, in the conversations, like you're saying, but I would almost look at it as like, you can almost cut a line across here as that things that the top, the top most impactful cost factors here are in planning, with maybe the exception being like encryption, which is just like which is, you could argue, is a best practice we've been talking about forever, but it's still up there. So I think, thinking about encrypting everything is just a good practice that can save you money. But the rest of this is like proactive threat hunting, threat intelligence, offensive testing, training, board insight, things like that. And the rest are the basics: data basics, identity basics. So you could pick these and be like, look, if we do 5 of these things, we're much less likely to have a problem if we have a breach.
Yeah.
It's like the least impactful positive factor is an MSSP, which I also thought was pretty interesting.
As someone who's done red team engagements where one of the things the client asks is, tell me what you're, when you're testing and what you're testing, because I want to see if my SOC, my managed SOC tells me anything. And the best is when they're like, yeah, we saw these 3 alerts. And they're like, okay, you saw 3 alerts. We did like 15 things, and we did it 3 hours before you saw anything. So, yes, MSSP.
We've been in and out.
Great moneymaker, but not always the most effective security control. But
yeah,
that's definitely another topic for a different day.
Yeah, MSSPs and DevSecOps. We'll see. So look, if you're listening, definitely read the report. Take it all with a grain of salt. I think it's really useful to have these numbers and to see them compared against each other. I'm always, like, even the Verizon report is like really nice, and there's a lot of work that goes into that. But these are they only have so much data from so many people, and always read it with a skeptic mind, I think. But I'm like a optimistic skeptic.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely good. Definitely good info. The DBIR is definitely interesting. Things don't change as often as you think, and sometimes it's just kind of reaffirming what you already know. But this was definitely interesting to add to that. So,
well, one of the things in I can't remember this report or the DBIR, but like in education, web application attacks fell out of the top 3 vectors for education in one of the reports, which I thought was really telling, because ransomware went up and phishing went up and social engineering went up, and like the attacks against like remote workforce tools went up. And so web app wasn't necessarily the vector, because the easy pickings was people working remotely in their insecure environments and being more trusting and doing things over Zoom and all that. And I thought that was pretty interesting that fell away over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Hopefully that means that we're doing a better job in the AppSec world. And I do think we are, not to be a skeptic, I do think we are. It's spotty, it's spotty. There's definitely, the trend overall is good, but there's definitely kind of bumps along the way that you see when you do app testing. But yeah, that is interesting. It's definitely more work than just sending a million emails and phishing people for corporate credentials.
Yeah, exactly. So not as attractive.
Yeah.
Well, look, I will leave the report links in the show notes, so please read them. We'd love to hear anyone's thoughts about these. We just wanted to sort of poke through it and talk about the DevSecOps, because it's, one of the first times I've seen the word in one of these large reports, and it was pretty exciting to see that. And I'm hopeful that folks will use this as a way to integrate security by design and security by default inside of their workloads. Any final thoughts?
Keep DevSecOpsing.
Man, it is. You said you did have an early day today. Keep DevSecOpsing, folks. That's the takeaway for today.
$1 million.
All right. Well, look, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.